Hello, everyone. Greetings to all those who have joined us today. Today is our second day of our lecture program of Unthinking and Learning Laboratory. And today we are continuing to discuss some things related to sound and politics. Today is Vita Zelenska. She's an anthropologist, doctoral researcher at Leibniz ScienceCampus Regensburg, one of the curator of the Vslukh educational program, experimental thinker and artist. Her lecture is called Sonic Politics of Non-Separation, Political Agency of Sound and Its Possible Boundaries. It will be devoted to describing sound as some of agent of change. And in her lecture, Vita will explore the politics of sound as a range of connectedness to the body, to distant places, to not so human objects. So I encourage you to ask questions here in the Zoom chat or in our YouTube channel. We will definitely pass all questions to the lecturer. And right now I'm giving the word to Vita. Go on, thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Zhenya. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you all the organizers of the program, and especially to my interpreter, who will have really piece of work today. And yeah, I hope it will work fine. So at first, and also I would like to thank my institute, Leibniz ScienceCampus Regensburg, which supports my bigger research on migration and political sound and knowledge production around migration right now. So yes, I would like to start the presentation first. Just a second. Okay. So I would like to start talking about political agency of sound with my own story as a researcher that explores sonic politics. I started thinking about the political agency of sound around 6 or 7 years ago, when I was a master's student and decided to do a research on the contemporary performance of the Greek musical genre Rembetiko, which history is intertwined with the political history of contemporary Greece quite strongly. However, the political meaning of Rembetiko is rather elusive, and I think this elusiveness is where my actual interest to sound as political agent actually started. So Rembetiko is a genre that was born as a result of repatriation of Greeks from Turkey after Greek-Turkish War, and as a result of Minor Asia catastrophe at the beginning of the century, at the end of 10s and beginning of 20s. In the 30s, so this is a mixture of Ottoman music, also Greek folk music, Greek workers' music, and this was born in the poorest city and port areas in Greece at the beginning of the century. And yeah, so this was quite a marginal music at the time, but also I think it's important here to say that it was, like many other genres, largely defined by recording companies that came from the US. But this is just as a small notice. So what is Rembetiko is highly questionable, but there is a certain paradigm, a certain canon that helps to define it. So, and yeah, my research actually was that I talked to the musicians that play this music now, and to the people that visit their concerts quite often. And so they all had the image of Rembetiko, certain image of Rembetiko. And for some of them, this image was still quite political, which surprised me because this genre has actually developed very much into pop music and culture, so-called laiki music in 60s and 70s. And I thought that it, it doesn't have any political meaning anymore. But yes, so a little bit into the history. So this genre was censored, this kind of music was censored in the 30s during the first dictatorship because it having some so-called Eastern sounds in it, because it partially was related to the music of Ottoman Empire. And the Greek government wanted to censor it so that it resembles the Greek nation as a fantasy of Europe, as also Greek dictatorship fantasized about Greek being a cradle of Western culture, as we all know. It's quite a fantasy. So, yes, after that, this music was also popular among communist partisans um, uh, of the Second World War, and it was constructed as a genre of resistance in 70s by a famous sociologist, Ilias Petropoulos, who has also written a book on homosexual culture and spent some time in prison for that. So I think this was the point where the actual political meaning of Rembetiko stopped to exist. But then, and came like as a part of popular culture and as a beautiful musical heritage. But then, talking to my informants or the musicians that play this music today, I've noticed that they often inscribe certain political meaning, not exactly to the lyrics, because there is no political meaning in the lyrics, or yes, there are some migrant suffering there or underlife suffering, but not exactly calling to resist or calling to protest. And so I was surprised that the certain political meaning was inscribed as to contemporary politics in Greece and transnational politics. The very sound of Rembetiko, which was recorded by analog recordings still, so it has this hisses and certain parts of live performance. So the very sound was called to be as resistant to capitalism and as leftist. Yeah, so this is interesting, and I'm not going to stop and try to resolve this question, because I have written 100 pages about that, so it's complicated. But the thing is about my story is that I got interested in how, like, actually sound, whatever sound it is, could be political agent, also sound of music included, and meaning resistance or meaning politics in a very broad sense as a wish of change in the power distribution in relation to the issues on very, very different, that find themselves on very different scales. And this is also the moment when I started to think about the possibility of being reappropriated, a certain discursive and spatial looseness that constitutes the condition for the sound to acquire agency. Agency is a sound in itself, as a turnover in the distribution of power. So I will focus on this and other characteristics of sound in the next part of my lecture. I think I should also say that this notion of the possibility of being reappropriated as part of sonic agency or definition of sonic political agency also came to me with Rembetiko, and it also constitutes a huge problem or a huge issue to resolve, because Rembetiko was also reappropriated. Like this genre was reappropriated also by nationalist logic or patriotic logic. For instance, in 2004, it was part of the Olympics, or something resembling Rembetiko was part of the Olympics. But so I was thinking how just certain music or certain sound can be easily reappropriated by certain parties. And if it is reappropriated, then is there any, like, so to say, material or political meaning in it, like immanent, like which would be part of the sound in material sense in itself? And yes, so I think that here there is like two things that are problematic or interesting. Is that when we think about sound as an agent of, like, if we imagine that it's a living, like an actor, right? A living actor that changes things. I think that a condition for it would be this possibility of being reappropriated too, because if we perceive it as a living, as an actual actor of change, then certain discursive freedom is involved. So yes, I hope it's clear. And the loose structure of my talk will be as following. First, I'm going to speak about the political agency of sound and its ways of realization as connected to and or separated from space, place, body. Then I will describe the concept of non-separation as related to the political agency of sound, at the same time addressing the problematics of separation and non-separation of sound as an agent from the environment and various spaces and places in the body. At the end of the lecture, we will have some time for questions, so please, you can write them in the chat, as Zhenya has already said. Of course, I've missed already 2 slides, so this one is related to what I have just said. And oh yeah. So if we speak about the studies of political agency of sound, one of the first things that come to my mind is understanding of political possibility of sound as situated in between like this characteristic of being in between is the main feature of the political agency of sound. And this idea is in the book by Salome Fagelin, The Political Possibility of Sound, which corresponds to many of my ideas about the political agency of sound. It's a very important book for me. So political agency of sound is situated in between here and there, between different places, between bodies, and it connects them and restructures them through this connection. Oh yeah, I think this one stopped. Still, in the very analysis of political agency of sound, it is often separated as an actor, obtaining a unique emancipatory potential. Thus, this very act of separation is often present in the analysis of sound and in the very discipline of sound studies. And this is a problem I will address later. Now we will move to another quality of sonic political agency, and it was pinpointed by Holger Schulze, German sound studies theoretician, but there are many others who I think have spoken about it. So this is the possibility to permeate other bodies and spaces, and at the same time being permeated. Sound is permeable and permeating, deeply bound to places and space. Sounds imprint places, but also change them, transform them, leaving all the way the same. Sounds are always local and translocal at the same time. They are hard to situate. Sound of different places as parts of their rhythmical structure, but also as their ways to other places. Sound take place, but it leaves place for everybody. It is everywhere and it is inside. Just a second. Now I would like to speak about an artwork which represents or is, I think, very showing, related to the ideas that I've just presented. And this is a work by Jana Shostak, a Belarus activist who now lives in Poland. It has been presented at the exhibition Every Day, Kожny день, in Mistecki Arsenal in Kiev, that was organized by a group of curators as an act of solidarity with revolution in Belarus. So if you happen to be in Kiev, you still have the chance to visit this exhibition. I've been there virtually, and I think it is a great piece of work. So here I'm going to read the description of this work from the booklet about the exhibition. Quote, in early August, Jana organized the action A Minute of Shouting for Belarus, where she would go out into the square at the European Union delegation building in Warsaw every day. It was in 2020. On September the 8th, after Mateusz Morawiecki met with Belarusian opposition leader Svetlana Tikhanovskaya in a Krakow suburb, Jana Shostak shouted at the Polish Prime Minister in front of the cameras to draw attention to the problems at the border. That is to Belarus citizens not being accepted to Poland as political refugees and having coronavirus as a pretext. 2 days later, the Prime Minister called her and confirmed that there had been violations in the implementation of the resolution and resumed the issuing visas to citizens of Belarus. When I'm thinking about political agency of sound and in relation to this work, the first thing that comes to mind, one shouting, disturbing voice, reflecting from the buildings as a siren of the revolution, sliding tone of an immense shouting volume, reminds of the sound of emergency cars, of the state of emergency. It is a state of emergency in itself that resonates in the bodies of people on the square, that touches the walls of buildings as if it wants to move them. With no lyrics, it makes us attentive to the surrounding, to the square, to the moment and the state of things in it, to the living flag of the red, white-dressed body, as if everything was moving a little, as if shifting. That little shift that unorderly sound makes. I've just remembered that you can also visit the exhibition online and listen to this work, because it was technically problematic for me to organize us to listen to this work, but you can find the site easily and listen to it on your own. Maria Papapapoulou, a Greek anthropologist who made a research on the anti-austerity movement in Greece, exactly at Syntagma Square in 2011. She notices the strength of unorderly sounds. She juxtaposes organized political parties' protests where the megaphone sound captures the space as its rhythmical shouting and familiar songs feel rather repressively, to the spontaneously organized sit-in, at which the sounds are overlapping and coming from various sources, and still existing in a certain kind of balance with each other, giving space to each other. For Papapapoulou, the latter has bigger political potential. So, as you might have noticed already in this speech, there are two contrasting understandings of political agency of sound. And one is that it could be reduced to political agency of protest or of political speakers, etc. And the other is that it can be an agent in itself, although still connected to the latter. So, for me, for my theorizing, I want also to quote the work on Black studies, but also to mention Black sound studies here, which is quite an important field and a part of sound studies. And there is a work that's not directly related to sound studies, but it still has a lot of sound in it, lots of sound in it, and especially in the way it is written. And this is the book Undercommons by Fred Moten and Harney. And I want to quote introduction by Jack Halberstam. While describing the London riots of 2011, Harney suggests that the riots and insurrections do not separate out the request, the demand, and the call. Rather, they enact the one in another. I think the call, in the way I would understand it, the call as in the call and response, the response is already there before the call goes out. You are already in something, you are already in it. For Morton, too, you are always already in the thing that you call for and that calls you. What's more, the call is always a call to disorder, and this disorder or wildness shows up in many places in jazz, in improvisation, in noise. The disordered sounds that we refer to as cacophony will always be cast as extra musical, as Morton puts it, precisely because we hear something in them that reminds us that our desire for harmony is arbitrary, and in another world, harmony would sound incomprehensible. Listening to cacophony and noise tells us that there is a wild beyond to the structures we inhabit and that inhabit us. Morton and Harney tell us to listen to the noise we make and to refuse the offers we receive, to shape that noise into music. So this is another quote about unorderly sounds. And for me, for my theorizing, this is the moment when material agentiality of sound in itself and its political potentialities or possibilities, to use the term preferred by Salome Fergelin, come together. And my own understanding of political agency of sound emerges from this encounter. Okay. There are various understandings of political agency of sound. That is through the spatial dimension of it, the bodily dimension, the discursive dimension. I have already mentioned it. There is also an attempt to define the political agency of sound in a broader sense that understands sound as a separate actor, as an actor in itself. In my view, the possibility of sound acting politically in itself depends on the possibility of its redefinition as to all the dimensions that I have mentioned: bodily, spatial, discursive. And while in reality we cannot separate political agency of sound from all these dimensions, its very agency, in my view, becomes possible when we do not stick to them, but also do not fully separate the sonic agency from them. Full separation of political agency of sound is wrong in the political sense, to my mind, as it does not take into consideration the responsibility for certain sounds and their actions. That is responsibility for material discursive cut in terms of Karen Barat. And on the other side, full definition of sound by its physical and discursive surrounding cancels the possibility of sound as an actor in itself, as an independent, in a certain manner, actor. And this second understanding of sound as an independent actor is important too, and we will see it later when we will be talking about fences and rocks and other not so living objects. So full instrumentalization as well as full identification of material processes such as sound, they both risk ignoring structural inequalities in the distribution of power. Protest sounds, they belong to the protesters, they belong to themselves, they are both, they belong to the buildings too. Political agency of sound as related to the body. Body is a space that has a certain geography where itineraries can be created. As well as this geography by itself, sonic roots of the body can imply emancipatory potential. Even if we merely take this inner geography as not separated from the outer geography, as a place of sonic action that is happening in between, in terms of Salome Fergelin. If we think about the feminist sonic geography of a body, for instance, McKittrick's study on the bodily geographies and their emancipatory potential in the places where there are no other political possibility of for female black bodies. We can't really separate the sounds coming from the body from those that are permeating it from the outside. But in reality, they permeate each other, they overlap, turning over the outside hierarchies, such as I speak, such as you speak, I act, you act, I act. You respond to my action. One of the renowned examples of understanding political agency of sound primarily through the body is the study by Brandon LaBelle, Lexicon of the Mouth, Poetics and Politics of Voice and the Oral Imaginary. I will read a small quote from the introduction to this book. In this regard, I would propose a politics of the performative that engages the dynamics of iteration and iterability as a question of the mouth, a discourse of the paralinguistic and the buccal, which might also spirit a parapolitics. That is, in support of an expanded voice, not only for finding a representational space as a point of entry and reasonable debate, but also a voice full of imaginary drive, and those animate and poetical expressions that turn our bodies toward other species, other material forms, or immaterial apparitions, as well as each other. End of quote. Political agency of sound and not so human objects. What if a tree can talk? I think we need not to exclude the voices of trees, of rocks, the voices of fences and borders. Then the voice becomes an actor that blurs the separation between the living and dead, at the same time redistributing binarized, gendered, racialized spatial power structures. Yes, now we can see my very elaborate illustration of speaking rocks and speaking fences. And the second picture is deliberately shaking as if it was speaking and vibrating. In her study Geontology on geontologists, Elizabeth Povinelli gives an example of non-separation of agential sound. It is, as we will see from this example, it is important to see rocks as speaking, that is having sonic agency. And then the indigenous land in Australia is considered officially sacred and cannot be taken away from indigenous people. That is, for many native citizens of Australia, the objects are speaking to them as souls. And if for Elizabeth Povinelli gives this example from mining industry extracting land, how mining industry is extracting lands from indigenous people. They so if they say, or if they consider the rocks as being silent and not speaking anymore, the place is considered not to be sacred and then could be given for businesses. And so the question of dead rocks or living rocks, the rocks that are living through speaking and having voice, is also the question of coloniality and the question of repression and the question of exclusion. So this is exactly the example when it's important to see sound as an agent in itself. And so for, as Povinelli says, quote, non-life has remained fairly firmly sealed in its opposition to life within extractive capital and its state allies, end of quote. And speaking rocks break this opposition. Australian media artist and theorist Nori Neumark also mentions speaking rocks as a part of responsible connection between new materialisms and the discipline she is working in, the voice studies. This responsible connection is also one of the examples of research through non-separation. So, as we know, sound is inseparable from its environment. Quite a few theoreticians have been writing about it. Don Eide, Nori Neumark, Salome Fergelen, and many others. Also, those who are working in acoustic ecology, like, for instance, Leah Barclay, that has been mentioned in the announcement of this lecture. So, non-separability of sound from its environment, from its surrounding, has certain political implications. And one of them is that such an approach excludes colonial logistics of separation and binarization. So this is another side to it. I think, for instance, those acoustic ecologists who are working to protect certain places through sound, for them it's important not to separate sound from the environment. So the first example was about non-separation of life and non-life, but still seeing a sound as a separate agent. And this example is about sound being non-separable from the environment for political causes. And now we are moving from rocks to fences, as we can see on the right picture. In 2020, Greek government, like many other governments, used coronavirus as a pretext to make carceral policing stronger. And so they decided to close previously open camps for refugees, seeing refugees and migrants as dangerous subjects, although at the moment most of the cases of coronavirus were outside. And what I know from Greek activists is that at the moment when the camps were closed, some camps didn't have any cases of coronavirus. It was really used as a pretext. So in September 2020, the activists of the movement or a group, Solidarity with Migrants, came to visit to the Tsona camp, if I'm not mistaken, around one of the many camps around Athens, and to bring some clothes and medicine. And they were not let in. Previously, they were let in to give things, but now they weren't let in. So they protested and they communicated with the insiders by shouting and hitting the fence. And thus, the fence becomes a part of political action with its sound. The noise of the fence being hit helps them with its voice together with the activists. And after this event, people from other camps ask the activists for a visit to support their demands in medical help and other things. In her book, Voice Tracks, Nori Neumark writes about an artwork that used the voice of the fences that were created to separate or divide indigenous, divide territories of native Australians. The artists John Rose and Hollis Taylor called it the Fences Project. They used, just a second, they used barbed wire as a string that separates these lands as a string instrument. And local people came by, and this, I think, is a funny example, and also about the relations of such political art projects when the authors come to some repressed in certain ways groups and want to create a work, and then they see that the people who suffer know it better, or the people who live there know it better how to do this. So people who live there, they came by and said that the artists are using the fences wrongly because they are not painted. And if they are not painted, then it's dangerous for them to speak. Another resistance that the artists saw in the place was that the barbed wire is much harder to play on to bring some sounds than string instruments. And the artists complain that the fences don't want to give in, showing their character. I think their project is important because it does not let imperial practices operate in silence. It is also important that the barbed wire has its own voice, as the local people say, and refuses to give in to the art project easily, obtaining its own agency and thus resisting the objectification together with the people who own this land. I want to quote a little bit from the work of Nori Neumark about this art project. Quote, "To have a voice is to be sung into existence. I hear in the voices of the fancies a musical relationship, musical in quotes, to a thing, to a fence, inflected by new materialism. The fence is no longer some generalized thing that could be anywhere, nor is it a simple instrument waiting somehow to be mastered. Rather, it is a particular, unique, and in and of the place of which its voice sings." So the author equals voicing and giving agency, and sonification for this author means also agensification. So now I would like to summarize this lecture a little bit and finish with some other problematic points. So why this question of political agency of sound as non-separation is important? It has a slash because it's non-separation and separation at the same time. So they are both. And there are multiple ways in which non-separation is important in relation to sonic political agency. Firstly, it is the focus on epistemology in understanding the sound politically, following Salome Voegelin and Karen Barat in her theory of materiality and discursivity and epistemology. Also, it is the way to see sound as a separate political agent, while it is still always connected to body, space, and often certain discourses, especially in the case of musical sounds. It helps to bring to the light the exclusions that understanding sound only ontologically might produce. There is the discussion, there is an article by Maria Thompson and Annie Go on sonic cyber feminisms. In some countries and in some places, quite often, you need to get permission to produce sounds as a street musician outside. And it is the municipality that decides on the appropriateness of certain sounds. So sonic policing gets to decide who is allowed to touch other people's bodies. And it is a type of connectedness too. I would like to finish my lecture with a thought of sonic criticism as a part of sound studies, sound anthropology, sound art, imagining how the political agency of sound, its anti-representational potential, could be realized and is realized through the logic of non-separation. Thank you.
Thank you, Vita, for your such intense and very profound lecture. So let's go to the questions, I think. Maybe as a moderator, I will ask a first one. It is not a question, maybe even a comment, but maybe you can say something a bit more about it. I say so because I face with such a problem when I think about politics and sound too. So almost all studies of sound that focus with such problem, with the problem of agency of political agency, of social agency of sound, they describe sound as or even a sonic as a non-representative phenomenon that allows us to abandon strict dichotomies. Yeah, you said about that in favor of creating a multiple or even a multitude subject that can, among other things, redistribute some relationships not only between human but also with some non-human entities. However, despite the charm of this project, such an understanding of agency, for me at least, remains only a kind of promise when it comes to issues of actual politics. Yeah. Can such an understanding of the agency of sound give rise to a political subject, even if even if in its I'm sorry, plurality, multitudinous, um, etc. Yeah, and the second maybe point of which I propose to think, what kind of politics are we going to deal with when we think about sound in a such way? Understand that this question is quite abstract and maybe complex, and maybe you can't answer it fully. But I think this question we should keep in mind because when we think about it, we knew that authorities and power, you described it too in your lectures, are able to appropriate sound for their own purposes.
Yeah, thank you for the comments. And this is exactly the problematic that I'm trying to reach with this idea of non and separation at the same time. Because I think I was quite critical about this agentification of sound and only positive understanding of sound. But for instance, in this example with fences, it has real material and political consequences when we understand something as having like sonic imprint, as having voice, as speaking. So this is, for instance, is one example. And also, yeah, this work by Jana Shostak is also interesting in that matter, because it, like, on the one side, it speaks to like bigger political issues, and it's implemented in the certain representative structure too, because it represents the Belarus opposition, right? So it just, or legitimate power, should we say. But at the same time, the very sonic strategy that she chooses is without lyrics, so it's non-representative, it's very bodily, like the very, very weapon of her voice, and this is the only thing she has. So I think it's important to separate it and to see anti-representational potential in sound, because it certainly has it. Like it has it primarily also as related to the body. I think that it's embodied. It's not that much related to vision as it is to, or to the outer world, or it connects, right, the outer physical and inner physical world. And yeah, I think it has this potential, but we should still be critical about that. But for me, it's important, I think, also as for a feminist or non-binary person, it's important to connect those bigger representative politics with other like body level, because they are actually very much connected, and not to separate them too, and not to separate them through the sound. And for instance, I'm doing this, it's another thought that I'm having, and I will try to stop here for someone else to speak. I'm studying migration right now, or displacement. I don't want to use this word migration, but it's clear still, in Greece. And I am like there is this problem that Rosie Braidotti mentions, overrepresentation of migration. We have seen all these poor kids so many times, or we have seen these dying people so many times that they don't reach us at all. And so I'm very much sick of the study of representation of migration,
Mm-hmm.
because both like of representation, but also of the study, because it doesn't give us anything else. It doesn't give us a real connectedness to the situation, to the people. And I still believe that sonic situations or sonic events can be more useful for that, and having more anti-representational potential in that sense. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. This is a very interesting turn. I don't even think in such way about it. So I will be waiting, and maybe we are all be waiting for your research about displacement with the using of some sound studies background, sound study epistemology, etc.
Okay.
Thank you. Next question. It is maybe even connected with the first one. It
Mhm.
seems as sound emerges its political agency as sound of shouting, noise, speaking, music, but not impossibility, struggle of making sound of or silence. It is always connected with some sounding, doing, yeah, but not with some not non-doing or silence in this sense. Is it clear, or maybe I should?
Yeah, it's clear, it's clear. Is it the okay? Yeah, it's thank you. It's very nice comment, and I really like it. And I just think that I've cut my lecture because I thought it would be too much, and I was right. But there is this like silence is also important. And for instance, also in this situation with the fans, silence is also political. Like if we see things as silent, it's also political. But I've been thinking recently a lot about like sonic ecologies and silence as a sellable thing. So silence is highly like it is very much yeah, I think for me, or for the studies that I've encountered, silence is very often neoliberal, because
Mhm.
it's something where you can like buy a beautiful vacation in Canara Island, I don't know, and Canary Island, and it's silent, and you can you can afford it.
Mhm.
Or like richer neighborhoods, they are often they are more silent or more policed. Policed means more silent. So it's interesting how to think silence in another way, because there are other ways for sure, but they don't come to my mind even now. So thank you very much for that comment.
Yeah, great turn, because sometimes silence describes as some kind of way of stopping the status quo or some order of things. Yeah, and silence in sound can be described in such way. But your approach to describe silence as some of neoliberal privilege, even, it is really interesting. I don't think in such way before you said that. It's cool.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thank
so
you.
maybe next question. It is concerned with your introduction word. And there is a question. Can a cover be considered a political sound gesture? There is an example. In the USSR, because of the Iron Curtain, many Western songs were covered, stolen, and these covers had completely different meaning. Now, plagiarism is also perceived as a violation of one boundaries. Yeah, and also there is an opinion that is not possible to create any unique melody. So, cover is a political sound gesture or not? In your opinion?
Uh, Thank you. I think it really depends on the situation, and it really depends on what, why, who, cover. From what you say, I might think that it could be a gesture that I know, like, I don't know. I wonder. I'm just thinking right now, because you notice this like thing about copyright, and
Mm-hmm.
I like in my lecture I didn't use any works because I'm thinking of copyright, and the consequences of it. But there is this idea of copyleft, right, where you share everything.
Mm-hmm.
And there are also, I think, databases of music where you can take sounds for free. So there are some, I think there are some copyleft initiatives in music too, but it's very much capitalistic too. So maybe we can even see the, like, I don't know, the gesture of color as an undermining this capitalistic logic of strict copyright. Or, yeah, it's interesting. I don't
There
know.
is some examples, for example, plunderphonic music by John Oswald. His albums were constructed entirely by using samples, and they were really recognizable, not as in some experimental music where we cannot reach to origins of that sample, but he's purposely done that to raise the question about illogicalness of copyright and liberal paradigm of using some rights and such things. So yes, there is some example in art, at least, as I remember. So, and there is one more question. How is it possible to use your own voice when speaking about others without taking possession, arbitrarily taking it your own property? Folk music is an example of such possession, as I understood.
I am afraid I haven't.
Because
Yeah.
it is an example of reappropriation, actually, or maybe appropriation.
Okay, I still don't. Do you understand the question better?
Well,
elaborate maybe if you think you understand it better, because I think.
Well, there is a question. As I understood, there is some logic behind this question, which understands that we when we use some forms of for example, of non-Western musical forms, musical gestures, etc., we actually appropriate them, and we lose our voice, our inner voice, which belongs to our culture. And instead of that, we are using and appropriate a voice of another culture in this way. And folk music, as for example, it listed there, I think is a quite well described phenomenon and genre in this way, because there is a common understanding that folk music, which is base for all of pop music of second part of 20th century, yeah, it is a kind of history of appropriation of black form music into white one culture. So how we can use some other forms of musical expression, not being as colonial appropriators, maybe, as this is why as this question I understood.
Yes, thank you. I actually, yeah, it's a very interesting question, also in relation to world music, which is another separate thing, but it is actually a lot, like, yeah, very much appropriation, like appropriative or inscribing or objectifying. But like my interest for Rembetiko started with world music, actually, when I was younger. And I think that coming from this, I could use the references to other artists and scholars. Again, from Leah Barclay, that the important part of acoustic ecology or ecological art sonic projects is reaching out to the community. So one of the things that we can easily do, or not so easily, but do, like to avoid this, is direct communication with the other people. And this very often it's not that easy, but it's actually it's actually a way to avoid it. I've just remembered, we still have time, right? So
Yeah.
I've just remembered a funny story. Like as I was doing my field work in Greece, I came to one, and I used to spend like 8 hours, 9 hours at night in taverns, because sometimes they play until 5, so I am staying there. And sometimes I get drunk, of course, like everyone else. And then once they catch me like very non-protected. So once they asked me to sing with them, and I can sing. So I sang a few Ukrainian songs. I'm Ukrainian, and a few songs of Rembetiko. And I know that I speak Greek all right, so it shouldn't be that bad. But the quite elderly musician who was in his 70s or something like that said that it would be better for me to stay with my own culture. Like you fit better to your own culture. And I'm still thinking about it sometimes, and how I don't very well fit to my own culture that I know. And how actually is also a way of, on the other side, on the one side, there is our fear of objectification, etc. And on the other side, there is this conservative folk protectionist logic, which is very, Rembetiko is not folk music, but I think it's similar. Like when you have some folk music, you want it to be like culturally clear, or I don't know. So world music, yes, it's bad, and reappropriation and so on and so forth. But I think there could be other examples of queering some folk music together with community, for instance. Like right now, I would want to make a research about feminist or queer Rembetiko. What like LGBT people playing Rembetiko, which is 80 years old or 100 years old and quite patriarchic. What do they feel? So I think they might want to change it too somehow. So so I think reaching out to community is one way. And another example that I've just remembered, and I have it in my article, recent article for Неприкосновенный запас, is this example of Jana Winderen making research of underwater sounds in Thailand, where she comes with all the mics, like hydrophonic mics, to hear the sound of fishes, because she's a specialist in fishes and all. Quite a good one actually. But then she learns that she speaks to community. This is important. And then she learns that it knows, like, local fishermen know better how to hear fishes through the wooden, like, what's the name for wooden sticks that I used to for the ships. So they hear better through their bones here. And and I think it's actually quite funny, because she speaks about it a lot, and then she brings it up a lot, and then she brings it as a political cause, because there also will happen a land extraction there, and they want to destroy this community and build a like living complex, like for rich people there. So because she reaches the community doing this musical research of her own, she doesn't appropriate their experience, but like she creates this equal thing with collaboration. And
Thank you. I think this is a very good way to stop our conversation on such note, because we are running out of time. So I want to say thank you to you again for your lecture. I want to say everyone thank you also for listening us. And keep in mind that tomorrow we will be meeting again in 19 o'clock. Follow our medias, websites, etc. Keep in touch. So again, thank you, Vita.
Thank you, Zhenya, and everyone who was here. listening to us. Thank you. Yeah, it would be nice to see some faces actually. If we want to show faces.
Yeah, everybody.
Oh, great. Hello. There were some people and not only black boxes. Hi.
This is our workshop groups actually.
Oh, okay. Good to meet you.